So you have a diver in the class who's taking archaeology or anthropology?
Yes.
Where's
He is not here at the moment.
Okay.
Who's that? I keep forgetting his name. He's in the water.
He is?
Yeah, he is. It's the one that I'm tending.
Leave him down a little longer. We're going to do a little different kind of job today. We're going to go take a look at a vessel to see if it's suitable for diving operations. So I've been asked for an opinion on a boat. This is a work boat, not a pleasure boat. The buyer is looking for a reliable vessel that can be configured for a number of employment-specific applications, one of which is underwater research in the fields of archaeology and marine biology, and that captured my attention. While there have been some very interesting approaches to underwater archaeology in Ontario, including some of my own, very few people actually know what is now required to do underwater research out on the lakes. This is an opportunity to introduce you to the relevant technology and legislation. Now I look at the beautiful work of others and think back over the many years of diving I have done, and I wonder about the future of underwater archaeology in Ontario. The hypnotic, and if you're diving air, narcotic environment predisposes the diver to seduction by the life. It is commonly called the water life. It is like the movie Endless Summer, only you go diving instead of surfing. And no matter how many great dives we have done, it's always about the next great dive. In your mind's eye, it is easy to think of your diver, weightless, effortlessly floating over the past. Shipwrecks are fascinating as archaeological sites, each a synchronic cultural snapshot of the culture and technological progress of the parent society that produced them at the time they sang. As we are all taught in grade school, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway is a transportation system, both now and in the past. Any kind of relevant study has to consider U.S. sites as well as Canadian. Like Ontario, each of the 8 states that border on the Great Lakes have their own archaeological licensing system and diving regulations. Professional archaeologists comply with local regulations. Sport divers on both sides of the border continue to do the most significant maritime archaeological research on the Great Lakes. They make finds totally eclipsing anything being done by the professional archaeological community. They write books and they make movies, and they are the authors of our understanding of our Great Lakes maritime heritage. Ontario archaeologists rarely make it off the dock, and most are poorly prepared for fieldwork anywhere. Many of the required skills needed to be an effective researcher have nothing to do with archaeology. A boating license, CPR, first aid certificate, Coast Guard or Power Squadron courses, the ability to navigate and attend to lines and run the boat properly are all parts of the seamanship skills that are required and needed for the job, but not taught in the anthropology department. If you wanted to project your research out onto the Great Lakes, this vessel may give you a reasonable idea of what you need and what it takes to do the job. But this boat may also be used for other applications. This boat may not be big enough to put a recompression chamber on board. A load like that can change the ship's center of gravity, and in my mind you need a vessel that's around 65 feet to run that kind of a diving operation. It may, however, be used for shallow water, surface applied diving operations, and I'm going to see if it can be used in that application. This vessel is 46 feet in length overall. The beam is 15 feet, the maximum draft is 3 feet 10 inches, and she displaces 23 tons. There is one head on board. For propulsion, this vessel has twin Volvo diesel engines. They're 6-cylinder and turbocharged, each producing 270 horsepower. They have marine transmissions. The propeller blades are made of bronze, and it's on 2 3/4 inch stainless steel propeller shafts. The mufflers are galvanized steel. This boat is fast. It may do 16 to 20 knots. This vessel was constructed in 1983 at the Aurelia Steel Works and was custom built for the Government of Ontario and used as a survey vessel. It's comforting to see that she is a union-built boat, so we have a reasonable anticipation of quality workmanship, and that is not always the case. The vessel is of welded aluminum and has always been used on fresh water. In this case, that's important. Some aluminum alloys are for fresh water, others are used for salt water. The build specifications have been provided, and this is a freshwater boat. So for a boat this size, the Coast Guard requires that you have certain safety equipment on board. You need to have one life jacket or PFD for each person on board. You need to have a buoyant heaving line 15 meters or 50 feet long, a life buoy attached to a self-igniting light, or a 15-meter, 50-foot long buoyant line, a reboarding device, a ladder, one anchor with 15 meters or 50 feet cable, rope, or chain. You need to have a bilge pumping system, watertight flashlight, 12 flares. They can be type A, B, C, or D, but you can only have a maximum of 6 D-type flares. Navigation lights must comply with the collision regulations. Sound signaling device has to comply with collision regulations. Magnetic compass has to comply with the safety regulations. Radar reflectors are not usually required for day use or inshore use, but are required at night, so you probably want to have one of those. You need Class 10 BC fire extinguishers at each of the following locations: at the entrance to any space where there's a fuel, burning stove, heater, or refrigerator, or an entrance to an accommodation space. You have to have a fire extinguisher at the entrance to your machinery space. You need 2 fire buckets and 1 fire axe. So we've got a fairly nice deep V hull in the bow. The 2 disadvantages are that flat stern is going to make for a boat that's going to yaw in a following sea, but if you have the power, you can stay on top of the wave. It's a very interesting hull. It's back here, that's a 3 chine hull. Very economical way to build a boat. This vessel may be used for recreational diving operations. The majority of divers are sport divers. A variety of diving certification agencies such as PADI, NAUI, SSI, ACUC, TDI, IANTD all offer scuba diving certification. There are a number of professions in recreational diving, such as dive instructor, dive retail sales, dive tourism, dive charters, etc. Recreational divers now use 2 types of diving equipment. The most common is open circuit scuba diving equipment. The diver uses scuba tanks and regulators. To accommodate any type of a diving operation, this vessel needs a large swim platform and a diver ladder. This is going to make her overall length just short of 50 feet. As you usually have to pay dockage and lock fees by the foot, for a vessel of this size, these fees are significant. Okay, so this is at the forward end of the starboard rub rail. You can see that there's been some damage there, and it's been corrected by a plethora of through bolts. In addition to the swim platform, additional changes have to be made to accommodate this kind of diving operation. It is principally a matter of storage and creature comforts. Secure tank storage and dive bag storage is the first thing you are going to have to address. Everyone needs a place to sit, preferably with a view. This vessel would benefit from larger windows. If it is used as a liveaboard, you need a galley to feed your guests, and everyone needs a place to sleep. It is a good practice to divide the boat into a wet and dry area, and provide appropriate suit hangers to ensure dive suits are drying properly, and proper equipment storage. Some sport divers now use closed-circuit rebreathers. The diver breathes on a loop with a counterlung. When the diver exhales, his breath passes through a carbon dioxide scrubber, and additional oxygen is then added to the mix to make up for what is used metabolically. Commonly, a series of 3 oxygen analyzers work with a microprocessor to maintain a breathing mix with the desired partial pressure of oxygen. Accommodating deeper diving, technical diving, or rebreather diving requires additional equipment. It is good advice to store oxygen used for gas mixing or decompression or diver first aid in a well-ventilated area. Secured outside on the deck is fine. It is pragmatic to store helium or argon in the same area. Rebreathers have to also be properly stored and stowed. A problem unique to rebreather divers is the care, use, and disposal of the scrubber medium. This is sold under a variety of brand names. At the moment, I have a 20-liter plastic pail of Sodasorb. As long as the scrubber medium is in the pail or in the rebreather, there is no problem. Unfortunately, scrubber medium reacts badly with aluminum. On shore or on the swim platform, with care, is usually the best place for replenishing rebreather covers. You do not want scrubber medium finding its way into the bilge. Surface supply diving operations require a different setup. All professional diving in Ontario falls under the domain of the Ministry of Labour. They have diving regulations, and surface supply diving procedures and equipment are usually required. For admission into a commercial diving school, a high school education and a medical are required. Canada has excellent commercial diving schools. Dive Safe International in Campbell River, British Columbia, is one of the larger schools. The Commercial Diving Institute is also located in British Columbia. In Ontario, Seneca College is the largest commercial diving school in Canada. In Chapleau, the Canadian Working Divers Institute is located, and on the East Coast, the Atlantic Commercial Diving College is located in Summerside, Prince Edward Island. There are many good diving schools in the United States. Training is usually 9 or 10 months duration. In addition to learning how to operate the diving equipment and learning how to dive, additional skills like underwater welding are taught. One of the largest employers of commercial divers in Canada is Dominion Divers. Most of the work done by divers is underwater construction or working on petroleum installations. A surface supply diving operation has a very different deck footprint from a sport diving setup. This vessel is not large enough to accommodate a recompression chamber, diving bell, or a mini-sat system. Under the Ministry of Labour regulations, without a chamber, the deepest you can dive is 100 feet, and you're limited to no decompression dives. You require a saturation system on deep dives depending on the depth and the dive duration, but all dives past 230 feet require a saturation system. A pressurized diving bell transports the diver from the surface to depth and a recompression chamber on the surface. The diving regulations are well thought out, easy to read, and designed to facilitate safe diving. All diving operations involve the following personnel: a diver, a diving supervisor, a dive tender, and a safety diver. Each of these jobs requires specialized training. The Ministry of Labor requires notification on all diving jobs. Dive logs and reports are required. According to the Ministry regulations, the diver is attached to a safety line and communicates to the dive tender through a series of pre-arranged line signals. Scuba diving equipment can be used in some situations to a depth of 100 feet, and all diving has to be no decompression diving, but the diver has to be tethered to the surface. Voice communications are required on all dives deeper than 100 feet, and all communications past 165 feet are recorded. Many underwater archaeologists start out as sport divers with a particular interest in shipwrecks and the past. Through organizations like Save Ontario Shipwrecks, they can cultivate their interests and learn more about shipwrecks, conservation, and maritime heritage issues. You can also continue your education and take NAS training. The program was first developed by the Nautical Archaeological Society to train divers working on the archaeological recording of the Mary Rose in the United Kingdom, and you can develop the technical skills needed to be a proficient field worker. But you still will not be an underwater archaeologist. To be an archaeologist in Ontario, you have to go to university. A 4-year program, an HBA, is required as a minimum. A master's degree, another 2 years of study, is preferred. However, in as little as another 3 years, you may be able to get a PhD. Then you will be fully qualified academically to do underwater research, but not in Ontario. When it comes to working underwater in Ontario, you will then be a fully qualified passenger. And according to regulations, there will be a life jacket on board for you if the vessel sinks. If you were looking for work on a research vessel, it helps if you are a good cook. There are a variety of scientific activities you can engage in, rove and side-scan sonar operations, for example. Your sport diving and NAS certificates and university degrees are irrelevant when it comes to working underwater in Ontario. In some areas of anthropology, additional study is required. For example, if you had an interest in paleobotany, you would of course study archaeology, but very likely you would also have a degree in botany. To work as an underwater archaeologist in Ontario, you require your degrees and a trade ticket from a commercial diving school. Unless you have a recompression chamber, possibly a saturation system, all dives are to be no decompression dives and limited to a depth of 100 feet. Actually, with saturation systems, you really need to have two, because if you're using one saturation system, you have to have another one that's on standby and can be on site within 48 hours. You will be secured by a lifeline, and before every dive, the diving supervisor for a diving operation shall ensure that all the lifelines or strength members used in the diving operations comply to the following standards. The lifeline has to be free of knots or splices, other than knots or splices necessary to attach the lifeline or strength member to the diver and to the dive site or submersible recompression chamber. The lifeline has to have a breaking strength of not less than 907 kilograms. It is attached to the diver's harness by a device, a shackle, that has a breaking strength also that is not less than 907 kilograms. It is no longer than is required to perform the work. It is securely attached to the dive site or submersible compression chamber if the diver is using surface-applied diving techniques. It is securely attached to the dive site or to a float visible to the dive tender if the diver is using scuba. The lifeline is tended at all times by a diver's tender continuously holding the umbilical if the diver is working at a location where there might be certain kinds of problems. In any kind of situation where there's a possibility differential pressure hazards exist, a tender is required on the line. The tender is required if strong currents exist. If there's any danger the diver may fall into a deeper depth of water, a tender is also required on the line. Required if live boating is in progress. The line is tended by an in-water diver's tender during penetration dives if line pull signals are not effective, or if the diver cannot be pulled to the surface without danger of entanglement. The lifeline is tended at all times by a diver's tender, continuously holding the lifeline, or, in the case of a lifeline attached to a float, continuously observing the float if the diver is using scuba diving equipment. The only time a dive tender does not hold onto the lifeline is when it's being held by a standby diver who holds it continuously while the diver is operating from a submersible compression chamber, and the lifeline is usually incorporated into an umbilical bundle, and he holds the entire bundle. Organizations like the Ontario Archaeological Society have a statement of ethics regarding the conduct of professional archaeology. Professional archaeologists comply with the laws, rules, and regulations in Ontario. On terrestrial sites, field workers wear safety boots, vests, and hard hats to comply with the Ministry of Labour regulations. It is a different environment with different regulations, but non-compliance is incongruent with professional underwater archaeology in Ontario. It is confusing for people who do not live in Ontario to understand why underwater archaeologists have to comply with commercial diving regulations. If you think about it, in Ontario, underwater archaeology is the same as commercial diving, in the same way that pairs figure skating is like ice fishing. If you are a professional archaeologist, a maritime archaeologist, or a maritime historian, or even an avocational archaeologist, you would need to have certification from the Diver Certification Board of Canada. This certification is based on the Canadian Standards Association Competency Standard, Z275.4. Exhaustive certifications are offered for all aspects of commercial diving operations. Occupational scuba diver certification does specifically allow archaeological investigation, but there's a catch. The next level up is a restricted surface applied diver. This is a longer course. You require 30 hours of surface applied dive time. Above this is unrestricted surface applied diver, and that is the full 9-month-long course. And the catch. The type of underwater activities you engage in determine the level of certification that you need. If you are making observations, the occupational scuba diver certification is necessary. If you are excavating, using an airlift or power tools, you need the restricted surface applied diver certification. If, as an archaeologist, you have any interest in shipwrecks like the ones we've been looking at, be a professional. Ask a sport diver. They now commonly dive to 300 feet and occasionally much deeper. Even if you go back to diving school and get the required certification you need, you essentially write off everything in the archaeological record past 100 feet, because you're an archaeologist in Ontario, and where are you going to get the required $20 million worth of equipment you need to keep up with the sport divers? The restricted surface applied diver course is well suited to underwater archaeology. The program is 10 weeks long, and this is the certification level Parks Canada underwater archaeologists now have.